But I like that about really, I set my intention to be there for the family, but it's really about asking for help from the baby too, because it is collaborative work. The birth is collaborative work, right? It's the mother and the baby that are birthing. They're working together. And so if I take a moment to have that intention and to have that connection, I like that a lot.
Welcome to the Birth Education Center podcast, hosted by myself, Care Messer, an entrepreneur, birth educator, and doula. My team and I want to help you discover your options in birth and postpartum, how to find your voice, and how to use that voice to navigate our maternal healthcare system. You and your baby are not just a number. This information includes doulas too. Now let's get started. We have a fun show today. I am welcoming Jeanne-Marie, and I always say it wrong because it sounds so pretty with your French accent. So I'm going to do my fake French accent, Jeanne-Marie Paynel. And I have known you for, I want to say 12 years at least. And you've been in the birth world-ish because you've been in the parenting sector. And I kind of want you to explain where you were before you came into birth work. And even before you became a parenting mentor, like where you came from, because you're bringing those skills forward when we talk about going in private doula work and things that we might be able to talk about to kind of aid that in moving forward. So tell me a little bit about who you were before.
So in another life, I was a graphic designer in advertising in Paris, France. So that is where I kind of began my professional career. I went to school in the United States, got a BA in photography, moved back to France where I'm originally from, and started working in advertising. Fluky thing because I spoke both French and English. I was hired by an American team that had just moved to Paris, and that's how I got into advertising. It wasn't something that I was looking for, but it ended up being perfect.
They needed bilingual.
Exactly. So I was trained on the spot to do all that work and met my husband in the advertising firm. And when we had our first child, around, I want to say she was around 15 months, we were both not super happy with our work life. We needed to move physically. We were in a studio apartment with a newborn. Things needed to shift. So we started looking around France to move, in a smaller town. And then I remembered that I used to live in San Diego as a teenager with my mother. And I remembered that I was super happy here and that I loved it here. And so I said, why don't we give it a try? And that's what we did. We exchanged our home and our apartment for 3 months and decided to come here. Now, I wasn't super convinced at the time because during that 3 months, I had a miscarriage and dealt with the American medical BS, if I may say so. And it basically dilapidated my savings account. And I was like, I can't do this. This is like, no way can I be here, because in France, you're coddled by the system. Let's put it, there's pros and cons, but it's definitely you're well taken care of. And so it was a scary experience to be here alone. And we decided nonetheless that we were going to make the move, just buy health insurance and go for it. And that's what we did. And so I came back to the States with a 2-year-old, continued in advertising and all of this, and then had a second child. Had a second miscarriage before, then a child here in the US. So I have the experience of having birth in France and birth here, both hospital birth, but completely different experience. And around maybe when he was 4, I had this moment of there's got to be more to life than this, because at the time I was a manager taking care of a small team in a big corporate America. And it was just like, I was making mailers for tax preparers. I was like, there's got to be more to this.
This is just a job, not a profession or a passion. It's a job.
Exactly. And I think I was raised to have passion, and that I had a mother who was extremely passionate about what she did. And it wasn't doing it for me. And I looked into going back to school. and decided to go back to school and get a master's in Montessori education because deep down I knew that I was meant to work with children from a very young age. I had been dissuaded to do it. Like, you don't want to go into teaching. No, no, no. And so I rolled with the punches. And there I was like, no, this is really what I want to do. And the story, it's a whole other story, but basically within 24 hours, I did a 360. I quit my job. I went back to school, and it was the best thing I ever did. And that's where I began really understanding my role or my mission or my calling was that this was invaluable information that needed to be shared with parents, right? Educators have all of this amazing information about brain development, about physical development, about cognitive development, and parents are clueless. I always say I traded my private office in corporate America for a stool in a room with 25 little people, which was just amazing. And there was just so many like revelations and ahas about children and human development and all this. And parents were always asking me, why are they so calm in your room and not at home? Or what's going on? I don't understand and all this. And that's really when I started to want to work directly with parents. And I think that's when I met you, is that I left the classroom and decided to start on my own to really branch out and share this information with parents as much as I could. So I went back to do also a training in Montessori that is basically when you do Montessori education, it's 3 years or 6 years. And so I had done 3 to 6, and then I went back and did birth to 3. And the birth to 3 was where I started really wanting to look more into the whole birth experience and so forth, because we talk a lot about prenatal life, about the importance of the birth experience, of the birth environment.
So important.
And the beauty with that is that during your training, you have to do 250 hours of observation. So just sitting and watching what's going on. And I was invited to attend a home birth where I got to observe. And that was, to me, I think, the big, like, poof, mind blown is like, oh, this is what birth is supposed to be like, right?
Like, woo, physiological birth. That's a little different.
It was so beautiful. And it was this woman who's a dear friend of mine, but she was in her own home, walking around, moaning, groaning, leaning wherever she needed to. I remember at one point she told the midwife, like, I don't know what to do. And the midwife very calmly said, you know what to do. Your body knows what to do. And everybody was calm. And she had her baby and got back in bed and snuggled her baby and ate what she wanted. And it was just so beautiful. And that was the beginning, I think, in my mind. I still had young children at the time, so I didn't feel like I would be available to do the birth work that I do today. And then fast forward, my children are grown, have left the nest. I decided that I was going to go for it, and I signed up for the Hearts and Hands Doula, which is a volunteer program in one of the hospitals here in San Diego. Got trained by them and attended multiple births, very different births, very different humans and experiences and cultures and language, and just amazing. But there was something missing. And that is the connection that we have with the families when we do private doula work, right? I realized after 2.5 years that I was feeling emotionally drained because I wasn't able to continue that rapport that I had with those few hours of one of the most intimate moment of their existence and just powerful transition. And it's like, okay, bye, see you later. And I couldn't bear it anymore. So I decided, okay, well, I'm going to set out and do private doula. And that has been wonderful because I get to do some prenatal education. I get to connect with them afterwards. I think this Sunday, I'm going to go see a family, their 1-year-old, right? So I get to stay in touch with them. And to me, that's beautiful. It's like we're part of their family.
Yeah, that continuity of care makes a huge difference. And and being a volunteer gives you such good skills for being able to meet that family in the moment and survey what's going on and be like, okay, I've got you, because they don't have anyone until you walk in the room.
Exactly. And, and some of the families were maybe refugee families who didn't speak the language or who didn't know what was going on, or incarcerated women, or people that are super ready. And I learned a lot from them. Like, you learn from every single experience. I ended up going and seeing a cesarean and all of that. So yeah, it was I think the best training for me to have done that, for sure.
It absolutely is, because you do see all walks of life, and it's kind of rapid fire, be a doula. You don't know what you're walking into, but you're going to figure it out.
The funny thing with that training is that, you have this pretty intense 2-day training, and then you get to attend a birth with a mentor. So a doula who's been around. For some reason, that first birth with a mentor, there were 2 births that day. And so we were separated. So I was like, so that was it. That was my training.
And you had been to a home birth, so you'd watched, but at least you had seen something instead of just, it's totally cold walking in this room.
Right. And I had my own births. I have 2 children. So I think that experience also prepares you for that, for sure.
And life experience. When I talk to doulas and they're freaked out by, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm like, if I was a sick friend, would you comfort me? Yeah, you'd know exactly. You'd know to feed me, help me to the bathroom, catch my throw up. Like, there's nothing different about that. There's some skills involved, but it's just comforting and being there. So yeah, it's so good. And before we get started with our conversation, when we're asking questions and stuff like that, and I'm going to ask you some questions that might go deep, I'm going to ask for your consent to give you feedback and stuff like that. You can withdraw it at any time. And if you would choose not to, just like, I just want to think about that, I don't want any feedback, then absolutely. So I'm going to ask for your consent right now. Can I ask you whatever questions?
You have my consent, Care. I adore you.
And the difference between France and America is different. And I think it differs with every country, because even Mexico's got a 50% cesarean rate, right? But when we're coming into birth work, especially I think mature women in our age group, we have a broad view of life experience. We've dealt with a lot of different people. But when we're sucked into birth work the way we are, there's things that we need to loosen up with ourselves and work that we haven't thought of doing yet. But that's what birth shows us. So whether we come into it 25 because we had an amazing birth, we want to share it, we come in at 50 because we were like, oh my gosh, I totally missed out. I believe that openness that birth allows will start to prick all of our parts and either let us heal or we burn out really quickly and we leave. So once we face it and understand there's going to be some hard bits, but it leads to such beauty, just like labor does, we become better women supporting.
Yes, definitely.
I ask in your form that you filled out what biases you have coming into birth work that you can recognize. Because I still, every once in a while, one will pop up and I'm like, ooh, I didn't even know that was there. And your answer was, I would much rather be in home birth situations as well as birth center situations. Can you tell me a little more about that?
Well, I think first from personal experience, so both France and the US, I feel, looking back on my own births, that my births were hijacked, that I was treated like just another patient or whatever. And that really bothers me deeply. And for me, I'm just so on a mission to educate women that you are mighty powerful and that you have freaking choices. Do not let people take your choices away. And even though I was informed, all of this, my choices were taken away. I was belittled in both situations. And like I say, it was hijacked. The births were beautiful. I have 2 healthy children. And yet there's something in me that's like, screw you. Why did you do that to me? And so I think that's one of the biggest reasons why I entered birth work, is to really allow women to just feel that power within them and to know that they have choices. And so when I say I have this apprehension about hospital birth and I would rather be in a birth center, which I have yet to do. I mean, I've been in a birth center in a hospital setting, but I have yet to be like in a totally independent birth center. I've attended 2 home births, both beautiful. And I probably why I say that because the last birth that I attended was a over medicalized birth, and I felt terrible afterwards. And I was traumatized. It took me days. I had to call a midwife friend of mine to help me process it and to understand that as a doula, it wasn't my fault because I think you take it very like, why did I let that happen? But they were so like, they were just rude and insensitive and disrespectful and all of this. And I just felt terrible that I felt like I hadn't maybe done enough education to this young couple that they didn't have to go along with all of it, right? And it's interesting because I think the last doula circle that I attended at your home, you were talking about this education and how important it is to educate. And if your client doesn't do the education course, you can back out and go, I'm not attending your birth, which I thought like, oh yeah, that's very powerful. Yet I had done that education. Like I had told them that they were going to offer Pitocin and you don't need it and this and that, but whatever. So it was sad. And this hospital wouldn't even let me follow my client into the operation room for the cesarean, which I thought that was pretty terrible. So yeah, I think that's left a bad taste in my mouth of like, oh my gosh, if I have a choice, I would much rather work with birthing people that want natural, easygoing, that know that they are mighty powerful, that they are in control and so forth. But at the same time, I'm here to be of service as a doula, and I can help them have that in a hospital as well.
Well, and let's talk about the similarities between your experience with your births and what you experienced with that family. Because even though they were educated, if they don't pick up the education, really own it, right? And this is the hardest thing too. And we did talk about this at the doula circle. I have learned over the years that when you're the doula and the educator, I don't do that anymore unless they're in a group class. Because if you miss something, right? And that's the one thing that shows up at that birth, who are they going to blame? And who is going to feel horrible that you forgot to cover that? The doula. Because I've been there. That's happened to me before. And I found that if they come through my classes, there's group interaction. It's almost like there's a unifying force, and then I can tweak things. Or if they're educated by somebody else and I'm reinforcing what they're saying, the conversation is so much deeper and richer because now they're hearing it from 2 different people. And if their provider is saying it, that's 3 different people. And if their lactation consultant is saying it, that's 4 different people. So immediately their whole world, it starts to shift. But then you also have to factor in, you don't know what their traumas are before they became pregnant. You don't know what their history is. You don't know how they've been walked on before, are in codependent relationships. You're with them for a speck of time. And we become really good friends right at the beginning, right? Because we're going to build connection and move forward. But we really have no clue who they actually are. And they're the ones who have to pick up that mantle and walk through because they are already empowered. We don't give them empowerment. They are autonomous individuals, but they may not know that. And when you watch providers be rude and take choices away and not offer things and whatever, if that family isn't autonomous and says, hey, that's not okay with us, it's the hardest thing to watch.
It is. Yeah, it is. And for me, I think that experience also enlighten me as to like, I need to learn to speak up more, where maybe if a provider comes in and starts to want to do something, I guess as a doula, am I allowed to say, is that really necessary? Or can we have a moment here? And I think that in this last birth that I mentioned, I don't think I had that in me to say, wait a minute, let's discuss, right? I think as doulas, we're constantly learning. It's a work in progress constantly, but understanding more what my role is and that I have power too in that room. Like I don't just need to be a spectator.
Yeah. And I think advocacy starts at the home. When we're with them, what level of advocacy do you want in the birth room? Do you want me to say, hey, dad, was that on the birth plan? And then let him take it or her take it? Or mom, did you want an episiotomy? You say stuff out loud and then let the parents respond. And some parents want you to say everything. And if you're comfortable doing that, you can. But remember also, we're working as building a bridge of communication because we don't want to leave them alone because we're not the important person in that space, according to the medical personnel. But that advocacy, if we've talked about it at home and role play scenarios with if something happens and this is said, how do you want me to handle that with you? So that we turn it back to them because they're the ones that have to own it. And if they just say, just tell me what to do, I don't do that. But I'm happy to remind you of what your plan is or whatever, because I've been intimidated by professionals in rooms before as well. And I've had a couple birth experiences like you had before I went, okay, I got to change something here. And it was me finding my voice and asking them, how much do you want me to speak up? You know, and there's some doulas that have no problem. They're bulldogs. They just be like, nope, not on my watch, which also has a place sometimes. But you have to find your happy medium with, if I want to attract clients, because that was on your list too, attract clients that will speak up for themselves, will own their birth experience. It starts with me because it's our vibe, right? And we won't take a birth with someone that we have to hand carry. We won't because we can't save them.
Right. And it's interesting what you say because it brings up this emotion of a little bit of annoyance, maybe, of my client having taken decisions before I got there, like decisions that we had talked about of, for example, just labor at home. Like you do not need to rush to the hospital. And they didn't hear that. So they went way, way, way too soon. And so by the time I got there, she was on Pitocin, she was about to have an epidural and all this. And I felt like, okay, I'm no longer in control because they've made all of these decisions without us talking about it. I think there was a part there also that was just like, did you not hear what we talked about? Did you not read what it was just like, ugh, people.
And we have to recognize that we're never going to be in control of someone else's birth experience. We want it to go a certain way because we know how beautiful it can be. But if they don't know how beautiful it can be and prepare for that, it's not going to happen. Just like there's a difference between an unmedicated birth where they fight through it and they just say no to everything, or a physiological birth where they're in partnership with the providers who back up and allow things to happen. Like those are two different kinds of births, even though there's no medicine involved. And if a family has fear, they're going to operate from the fear standpoint. So it doesn't matter how much we've taught. I mean, with my course, they have 15 hours of class time, 6.5 hours of online class time. I don't even know how many videos and how many podcasts and all of that kind of stuff. It's a college course in 5 weeks, and they should start earlier than that. And they still go, I didn't know how to push. We didn't cover that. I'm like, we have a whole class on that. Oh my gosh, what do you mean? And then they're like, oh yeah, we did, but it's too late. I already had my baby. And we just don't know what they're pulling in because of the pregnancy brain. But as a doula, it is not your responsibility. It is your responsibility to meet them where they're at moment by moment and be okay with it. It does not mean you failed them. It does not mean you should have, could have, would have, because they have to pull it on themselves, which is why we need to reach them earlier, right? Just like with your Montessori, we want to reach them earlier so they understand brain development and that lifetime patterns start in the womb and move forward. You know, the birth actually matters because it can differentiate that kid's level of anxiety for the rest of their life. How they were baked in the womb can develop their personality like that as well. Yeah, big things.
Big things. And that to me, I think is my frustration a little bit, is that families that are starting just don't have their head wrapped around the importance of prenatal life, of birth, of the postpartum period. All of that is just like, oh yeah, we're having a baby and get the nursery ready. But it's like, no, it's so much deeper than that and so much more important and all of that. So I'm working on it.
It is. Yeah. And I want to mention your podcast. She has a podcast called The Art of Parenting, where she covers all of this yummy Montessori stuff. So please go listen to it. It's fantastic. Amazing experts on it. So you are reaching people before they're pregnant, because they're sharing it with their friends and family. So know that that is taking place, which is one of the reasons that we started our podcast, because I got to get them before they even have sex. So that's the goal. How about I am your foreplay? Can we do that? I want you to kind of, if I can give you some feedback about this, start looking at a meta picture of providers taking away choice, because that can happen in a home birth and it can happen in a birth center, because I've seen it at both. And I have seen both where it was just as bad as it was in a hospital, because things happen and people are people, and they may have a bad day and it may be off. And you may come from a home birth with a midwife that you're like, oh my gosh, I will never, because we can't control the situation, right? But what it may reflect is, are the providers taking away these choices, or am I or them not being vocal and being an autonomous person? Because just like Gandhi, no one can take away my freedom unless I let them. You can keep me in a room, but it's my choice to allow that to happen. And we have choice in everything. Whether we own it or not is the other part of it.
Yeah, very powerful. Thank you, Cara, because it's true. And I often say it too, is like, life is choice. Like, you have the choice. So it's really not the provider's fault. It's the doula, the birthing parents, and fault is not the right word, but it's like, it's their choice to say or not say something. And in that experience that I shared, it was my choice to not speak up, or it was my choice to be like, okay, well, they kind of asked for this, or having that attitude that wasn't, I think in hindsight, not the most positive. And I mean, I was very supportive and they adored me and they thanked me and all this, but I just felt so out of control. And like you say, we can't control it. But I will add something just personal, a flashback that came back when you were saying this. My mother, bless her heart, who's no longer with us, but she had my sister and I, and then 12 years later had a third child. And she went to see, I think, an OBGYN, maybe she was 8 months pregnant. And he patted her tummy and said, don't worry, we'll take care of it. I'll give you something and she said, don't you dare put a hand on me. And she walked out of that office and had to go find another provider, because I was like, no, you're not doing anything. I'm birthing here. And I think that has always like stuck in my mind of like, you got to own it, right? You have to take charge. And she was like, no, I've had 2 good natural births before. It's like, why would you want to give me a shot or touch me or anything? Like, keep your hands off of me.
Because it's America. Because it's what we do. It's how we do things.
It's interesting. It was her third birth was in the States. The other one was in France, and I was born in North Africa. So very different experiences for her. And the US was like, back off. So
yeah, we cannot take ownership for their choices. We can only take ownership for how we are perceiving the situation and what our filters are. And we come from a place of our own lived experiences. Those also go back to our births, how our moms were treated, right? Was our dad there? Was he not? Or did my mom feel abandoned? You had shared that your mom had to flee the country to birth with you because it was a war zone, right? So there's this eminent, I got to save my baby. That trickled into you. Those were your feelings because they were hers, right? So birth is going to spark that so that you can look at it. And it's going to happen constantly until you go, ooh, I need to look at that. And sometimes it's a grief thing where you have to grieve that and be like, I have to just trust that it's going to be okay. I'm not in control of this. I have to lead with love instead of fear and management, right? Because I came in that way too. My birth with my mom was horrendous. And it was, I have to manage it and I have to shout it back up, which I still do. I just do it in a little calmer Aries way. But I feel if birth workers, if anyone who's in the birth room, because the OBs have their own experience too. We are all human, right? Why do OBs come into birth work? Did they have a shit birth with their mom? Like, why do they choose it? Out of all the different surgeries they can do, why would they choose this particular profession? There's some interweb there. And when you have OBs that are connected with that and they start talking about it, you're like, oh, dude, right? And those things are going to spark them every time they see them in the birth room as well. And the dad, he had a birth too, If there's another mom, she had a birth too. So all of our lived experiences are still stored in our cells. We may not even see it until the birth room. And we may hear something and go, I heard that when I was a baby, but I don't remember hearing it, but you did. So coming at it from, not only do we have our life experiences that we are aware of, we have our lived experiences from zygote on, from our mom. Were we wanted? Were we not wanted? Were we kept a secret because I was an unwed mother, pregnancy? So are we having a hard time finding our voice because there was shame around us? All of that makes a difference. And then you compile that with the birth, and then you have this little Montessori kid, right? Now what? And if we can all be conscious about it, it's going to be way different than if we are not conscious about it. And if we have a birth that was horrendous, talking it through with a baby who was there too is going to help unwind it for them so they're not carrying it forward. And as doulas, it's going to spark us until we figure it out. I had 7 breech C-sections in a row. And I was like, I'm bad luck. I'm the worst doula on the planet. Like, no one should hire me. I called my mentor sobbing. I don't know what it is, blah, blah, blah. Like, I thought it was after 3 and then now it's 7. I can't do this anymore. And she goes, ooh, you got some control issues around birth. And I was like, what? And then she started talking me through it. And I was like, oh my gosh. She goes, it's control. You're fearful. And that I had to unwind that. And then it was like, oh, then we had head down after a while. But I had to feel through that. Why am I so scared? And it was provider related, and it was related to my own birth. But I was midway through my doula journey at that point. So meta view sometimes when you're going to see repeating patterns is going to help to unwind some things that you don't even realize are there. And a lot of times that takes talking to another doula to go, can you figure this out? Because I guarantee it's not a mistake. It's showing up for a reason. Which kind of goes into your biggest fear working solo in the birth room is talking to providers or speaking up, right? Okay, so tell me, when you were at the other hospital doing volunteer work, do you think that had some kind of influence because you were working for the hospital? I'm air quoting that. And you have to mind your P's and Q's.
It's interesting because the fact that we were, quote unquote, part of the team, we're wearing a shirt that has the name of the hospital, where we're recognized as the volunteers that come and help them out and everything. I think there was a very kind relationship. And I felt also, maybe because I was in this volunteer role, I was still learning. So I would ask questions, I would comment, I would step out of the room with the nurse and ask, and all of this. So I felt like that was actually pretty positive, and there was a bit more communication. And then the hospital that I was volunteering at, there's a birth center and great team of midwives. And like a lot of the nurses that were there used to be volunteer doulas. It was like, so it's very family and loving and protected. So that's really the experience I had had. This experience was in a new hospital. I knew no one. And I came in as hired by my client. And I don't know, I was just taken aback by how kind of brutal they were being. And I think I was just in shock myself. And I remember asking the nurse, like, what was that all about? And she goes, oh, well, some just have their own methods or whatever. And I was like, wow. So I think it's more that now I am private and I'm on my own. So maybe there's this imposter syndrome thingamabobby going on of, well, who am I to I don't know. It did not feel, I didn't feel welcomed, I guess it was. Like where I volunteered, I was very welcome, open arms. Oh, thank you for coming in. Oh, you're so great. Because we're there for them, right? The nurses can step in and out of the room, and we're going to be there with a patient the entire time. So they're happy to have us there.
It's such a different vibe over there. It really is, because they're doula friendly. So I have a thought. You remember the feeling of feeling welcomed and able to ask questions and warm in the room. What if you bring that to the birth instead of an expectation of what you think is going to happen? And you walk in with the smile and the hug and the hi, and Jenny, you're the nurse. Great. My name is, and I'm happy to. And anything I can do to help make this seamless for my family, I would love to be involved as much as possible. And if I have any questions, is it okay if I ask you? because they would much rather have a doula like that in the room than someone they think, oh, geez, what's going to happen with this one? Right? And I'm going to give you some feedback here. You're not 25. So when I look at you, I see a warm woman with a lot of life experience. They don't know you haven't been in private practice for 20 years. They probably assume that. Let them assume it. It doesn't matter, because if you're walking in as this loving person that this family has hired and you're there to bridge, you can still speak up. But if you build that rapport right from the beginning, if the parents aren't feeling a connection to that nurse, you're not going to feel a connection to that nurse. They can excuse that nurse, right? And you can have already prepped them for that. But if you walk in with, I want to carry in that feeling, and that's the only thing I'm carrying in. I'm not going to carry in any feelings of how this family should be choosing or not choosing. I'm not going to carry in that I'm sure I'm going to get the bitchiest nurse on the block. I hope I don't get that asshole doc that I had at this hospital last time. And if you just walk in with, I'm here to love. And if I need to do a little strong love, I will. But I want to bridge that and build that rapport right from the beginning. And it's one of the hardest things to do, because you do feel like an imposter. You do feel new. But I will tell you, and going back to your form, you will get better birth education on what and how the bodies work with all these medicines and how it's working in the hospital than you'll ever get in a formal training. Because I've taken 3 formal trainings. They didn't do much. It was me reading, me talking to other people, me watching video after video and then questioning it, and then talking to midwives and building my network of people who knew more than I did to get those questions answered as I went. But being a student and observer in the hospital, that's one of the things I loved about the DONA paperwork when I was trained with DONA, is their paperwork said, okay, when did they check? What procedure happened next? And you could see where things would unfold by keeping track of that stuff. And it made more sense with the body does this, and this is what they use for thinning out the cervix, and this is what they use to get the contractions going. And it made so much difference for my brain on those first 3 births. It started putting all those pieces together for me. And I'm sure other certifications have paperwork like that. But I'm wondering how that feels to you, of kind of feeling like I could go into the birth room with open arms instead of anticipation or anxiety.
I think you're 100% right in that it's about the attitude that you bring in and the loving kindness and welcome. And like, I have to bring that vibe with me. It's true. And when I'm called into a birth, I have my little ritual where I'm like, okay, I'll be there in 45 minutes. I go, I take a shower. I make sure I don't have any perfume, scent, whatever. I have my clean doula clothes that I put on, get my little snack ready, whatever. And then I'm off, and I have a meditation or a prayer or what that I'm here for a purpose, and I'm here to serve the family. And I leave all of my stuff at the door, and I'm here, 100% for them. But you're saying add in another step of intention of, I welcome this loving collaboration, which I felt when I was volunteering.
Because you already have that lived experience, and you can create that every time, right? Because the nurses are in the room 1% of the time, literally 10%, 12% of the time by studies. You're the one that's setting that pace in that room, no matter what. And the cool part is, this is why I want everyone to have a doula. The more births you attend, especially in the hospital, the more you'll get familiar with, ooh, this is what they're going to say next time they come in. So you have time to prep the family. Hey, we've been doing this for about 2 hours. Your cervical check idea is going to be coming through the door either the next time or the time after that. So that's your choice if you want to do that. A reminder that, if there's no decision we need to make in the next few minutes, that a cervical check is not going to do anything other than tell us where you are. So remember, we talked about numbers and stuff like that. So you will get so good at knowing what comes next. Your families will be like, we had time to prepare. We felt like we had more choice. It makes a huge difference. Another bit of information I would like to give you an idea on. Not only are you there to serve the family who you've been preparing with, but you're there to witness the birth of the baby. And there are times when it's so tangled with policy, procedures, medicine, not going as expected. All of those feelings are in the room. And sometimes the only thing you can do is connect with that baby and say, I see you. Help me connect with your mom. What do I need to do for your dad or your other mom? What is it in this moment that I need to know that they need? And let that baby speak to you, because your intuition will be like, she just needs me to touch her hair. And you'll go, that's weird. I never touch hair. That's so personal. But that might be the one thing that allows her that release. Those babies are keenly aware that you're at their birth. They know you're there. They chose you to be there. That's why there's never a mistake when you prepare them all prenatally and then Julie steps in and does that birth. No mistake. That's how it was meant to be. That baby knows who's there to witness them. And that's our connection. That's our soul contract with the baby, way more than the parents. So figuring out a way to connect with the baby. And my ritual is kind of the same as yours. Clean, eat, grab, go. And on the way over, I'm talking to the baby. What do you need from me? How do I serve your parents today? Right? Because parents are parents. They've got all their stuff. And this baby is coming in fresh with only some earthly mom and dad stuff. They don't have all of their stuff yet, but they have a way bigger picture because they're a fresh soul. They're coming from the portals that we can't reach yet, but we're heading to. I'm excited to head to that next portal, except I know I'm going to come right back, but whatever. So think about, I'm here to witness, because sometimes that spider web of stuff is really thick and heavy. And I think it's easier to process sometimes those icky births. And are they icky births? Because they're lessons, they're life lessons. They're ours, they're the OBs, they're the nurses, they're the families. And it's our job to witness all of it, not think it should have gone, because we sign up for our stuff.
Right. No, I like that. I love that about speaking to the baby, because for me, the birth is so amazing in that you are witnessing the birth of this divine being, because that's what children are to me. They're divine little beings. They're so pure, full of love, and just perfect. They're magic, and we screw them up. But
or do we?
I don't know. It was interesting. I was listening before this call. Do you ever listen to Esther Hick, Abraham? So she was talking about having seen a mother whose 5-year-old was very intuitive, little being and saying things, but the school was like, can handle it. And she's saying, just because there's one child who is still in tune and gets it and is walking strong and being strong, and everybody else is limping around, we're going to ask them to start limping. And it was like, that's what we do. But anyways, that's a whole other conversation. But I like that about really, I set my intention to be there for the family, but it's really about asking for help from the baby too, because it is collaborative work. The birth is collaborative work, right? It's the mother and the baby that are birthing. They're working together. And so if I take a moment to have that intention and to have that connection, I like that a lot.
And you can take that from the very first interview you have with them, because one of the things that I talk to doulas about when they're in interviews is, what gift can you leave in that moment? You don't know if you're going to be hired or not. You're not going to do your whole spiel and say, and I do this position and this position, like give all that. But what intuitive drop of information does that family need in that moment? And I've had families say, we almost hired so-and-so, but we didn't. But guess what? She said this in our interview and it stuck with me the whole time. And that's the one affirmation I remembered. Does she know that? Only if I tell her. But we are there to give the gift wherever that is. It could be in the elevator talking about, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to be induced. That's your choice. Just because you're 40 weeks doesn't mean you're expired. But that's the one thing that she remembers in that elevator that you said as a random person that she didn't happen to randomly meet in the elevator, right? Because it's all about timing. It's all about connection, and there are no mistakes. There just aren't. And when we understand that we're witnessing this baby's one birth, because they get that experience one time, just like we did. And it's the way it's supposed to be. Sunroof, front door, medicated, not medicated, connected, not connected. Sometimes those ones are the hardest for me to watch. It may be all the things, but zero connection in that room. And I'm like, how is this child going to survive? What do they need to learn in this family? Because I know I came to a family that I kept thinking I had to have been adopted. This is not my family. And it was the one family I needed to be in to learn who I was. Hindsight though, it took me 50 years to figure that out, but I figured it out, maybe 45, but whatever. Let's talk a little bit about business before we wrap up. One of the things that you put on here was being seen. And I thought that was really interesting because I see you as so confident, so educated, so strong. And you have a podcast, you do birth work, you've been in advertising, you do Montessori, so you teach parents and kids. I've referred my parents to you for years. So I want to know what you feel about being seen. Take me through that.
I guess maybe it was more in the sense of being seen as a doula that is available to be hired and who's here for you. And I guess it's more about how to go about getting new clients and so forth, right? I had all these births because I volunteered, and then I set out on my own. I just so happened to be invited to speak at the San Diego Birth Network. And to be able to be a speaker, you had to become a member. So I said birth doula, and that's where I got my clients. Well, that's not working anymore because I don't know, they've gone under, whatever. So now it's like, okay, so how do I go out there and say, hey, I'm a birth doula. Are you expecting? I've got availabilities. I guess that's the part.
Okay. So being found.
Yeah, because being seen, I think I'm quite comfortable with saying, hi, who am I, and all this.
That's what I was confused about. I'm like, she's afraid of being seen? Like, what? So obviously networking, right? Networking, but your social media presence is all Montessori.
I know. And my social media presence is all about my podcast and then my business of being a parenting mentor. So that's something like, should I start another account just about birth? Because there's so much information that I wanted to share about birth. I follow all of these birth people and all this, but that's not the only thing that I do. Like I feel I'm a multi-passionate person, and I do Montessori, I do positive discipline, I work with parents, I work with teachers, I want to be a birth doula.
So it doesn't have to be elaborate, but let me tell you, these millennials and Gen Zers that are coming up, research the heck out of their doula. They need to find you in a doula format. They need to see what you say about birth. They need to get on a birth level. It's not hard to run 2 accounts if you keep it simple. If you feel like you have to post constantly, you're going to kill yourself. So you can create just an Insta site as well as a Facebook that is your doula name, which has your face as the icon. This is the biggest mistake I made in social media is I put my logo. Do not put your logo. Do not put your logo. Face. They need to connect with you because some people want a sister figure. Some people want a mother figure. Some people want someone of their same color, right? Like it's important that they connect with you. The Insta site can be 12 static posts of who I am, what I do, how much I charge, all the things like that. And then when you do a reel, just like on your regular page, you can hide the reels after 24 hours and they can find them there. But your actual position as a doula is always there because they want to get to know you. And it's okay to share birth doula stuff on both places because you're trying to get families into the parenting stuff and the podcast stuff early as well. And it's also okay to have a highlight on Instagram. I say Instagram because yes, you can reach on TikTok, but we're nurturing our families on Instagram more often than not. And a highlight that has your podcast, a highlight that has about me. I'm multi-passionate. I do this and this, but I also take 3 births a month or 2 births a month so that they can read through and get to know you. They will research the heck out of you, but they have to be able to find you. And if I'm looking for a birth doula, I'm not looking for a parenting podcast yet.
Right. And I like that. I'm thinking like I already have a website. Can it be just a page on part of my services? I have the parenting school, I have this, and birth doula. And there on that page have more information about what I believe about birth and so forth.
Yeah, it absolutely can. And that would be one of your services, but have it at the top in the menu. That's the trickiest thing. You want them to be able to find you Facebook should have whatever your birth doula stuff is, should be your birth doula page, so that it will lead to your website, birth doula page, and same with Instagram. So if you want to keep that same site, just make sure that there's a very definite presence on Facebook, on Instagram, TikTok if you want, whatever, that is birth doula, because that's what families are looking for. So that's one way to be seen. Another is really going to all those birth education courses. One of the things you're like, I feel like I don't have enough information. There's so many different tools. You will get such good birth education by going to Birthing from Within, both types of hypnobirthing, hypnobabies, like all of that, besides the local class, besides somebody else that teaches, anything that you can observe, you're going to learn from all those different people. And they are they're not the first people that get pregnant people, but they're close, but they know you. You've sat with them for 4 weeks now, right? You've asked them questions and tell me more about this. And you've taken really good notes. So if any of your families go to them, you can say, what happened on class 3? How did you guys process blah, 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 blah? And all of a sudden you're this expert, but you're just reinforcing what she taught, right? Nicole Morales, you guys don't even know. This woman, she's a Birthing from Within mentor, a spinning babies expert instructor. She's my age. And she's like, I don't know, 700 years older than me in wisdom. I sat through her Birthing from Within course. I took, 200 pages of notes because the wisdom that flowed out of her mouth. And I was just in awe of everything, totally opposite of what I teach in hypnobirthing, but yet the same. But her storytelling, and it was just so earthy and delicious. Within a week, I had lost that whole book of notes and had not looked at it. And I was like, oh, and then I realized I was meant to feel that experience like parents are meant to feel her. It wasn't about, and she said this and this, I had an aha moment. It wasn't about that. It was about connection and deep empathy with the people in the room. And I think the more education you get from different educators, the more connected you're going to feel to the birth experience in general, because it's going to reinforce everything you want to teach. Or if they're taking that class, you just have to reinforce it. I found it so much easier to be a doula if you're not the educator. So much easier, because you've built a network of support for them, especially if they're in a group class, and they've heard so many different perspectives. It's just reinforced their own alignment with it. And you aren't expected to remember everything or teach them everything because you can't prepare. I tell them in class, like, you guys, you might have a water birth accidentally in the tub in 2 weeks before your due date. I can't prepare you for that because I don't know what's coming. Like, I can only give you breathing tools and this and the ability to trust your own body. And that's the trickiest part with education as well as doula work. We can't do it all. And I think I felt more imposter syndrome trying to do it all than supporting in the best way I could for that family, which was one of those roles. So just a thought. The parenting stuff, that's the postpartum work and your expertise in parenting. They're not getting that from anybody else. Birth education, they might have an easier time, and I think all of my families need parenting education. Like, I've tried for years to say, take a parenting class while you're pregnant, take a parenting class before you're pregnant. They don't do it. Like, they just don't do it.
Right. Which is interesting, because that's kind of maybe another reason why I also got into birth work, is because there was this, and I think it was actually one of your classes that you were giving in person. And I came and spoke about preparing the environment, and everybody looked at me like deers in the headlight, like, what is she talking about? And I remember one dad in your class going, do we have to move? I was like, no, but it's just like, they're so like obsessed with getting the baby out that they don't even consider that there's the rest of their freaking life that they're going to be with this child, and that there's some things that would be good to know about human development. But so, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. And one of the reasons that I was like, how do I reach them before they're pregnant? So they're connected. So they're on a cellular level. They've started to work out their stuff. They've hired their therapist. They're working on all that stuff because they are bringing a fresh soul who's their biggest teacher, who deserves every sacredness to be held, etc. And we're guessing at how to raise them.
Yeah, we're guessing, and we're bringing all of how we were raised that we don't always agree with, but we're bringing it to the table because, like you say, we haven't processed it. So it comes with us. And that's the only manual that we bring to parenting. And to me, it's so important to reevaluate that manual.
Well, what's funny is that's the only manual we bring to doula work too.
Which is fascinating. Like, you've totally opened my eyes to that, because for me, I was like so deliberate about, I leave all of my shit at home and I'm going to go support this family. But it's true, in this last birth that I was describing, it was all the biggest fears that I have about birth that came, that I brought into that room, basically, and it's like, so, oh my God, life is just amazing. It's like constant work.
I mean, the reason we have a relationship is to mirror, right? So our relationship with our client is going to mirror us. So if we're aware of it, then we go, oh, that's my stuff. But I wouldn't say you brought it in. I would say it was reflected back to you.
Yes, because I've had other births that are just, as we say, butter births that are just amazing. And Mom just totally rocked it. And I felt like there was a part of me that influenced that, because I'm remembering one birth where when I first met them, I always asked, like, what do you know? What's your anticipation? What have you been told about birth? And she was like, oh, it's so painful. It's excruciating. And it's like all this. I was like, well, let's reframe that. And she ended up having on her birth plan, the first sentence was, do not offer any medication. Do not offer any pain medication. And I was like, okay, you've got this. And she rocked it. She was amazing. So I know that it doesn't all have to be ugly like that one that I described. It's like you say, I needed that one to reevaluate what my role is in that room.
We also have to let go of our expectations for every birth, because we have a part in it, right? And we educated, we said, we did our very best. We have loved them. We're holding their hand. And there are 3 parties in that birth besides us, and 2 main ones. And it is their dance that they're doing. So our ego, our help, our whatever has 0 to do with it. The witnessing, 100%. I encourage you to do more hospital births, because that's going to help work out the shit. And some birth center births and home births transfer. And you'll be in the same boat if you haven't looked at that, worked it out, talked through it, and really gone back to your births. Write down those places. Where did I feel like it was taken away from me? And was it taken, or did I let them override what I wanted? Did I even know what I wanted? Because there's that too, right? We just think we're having a baby and we don't even know what choices are available. So then we felt like we had no choices. Well, thank you for being here today. And I'm sure we're going to have some follow-up conversations, because I would love to. And I hope to see you at some future doula circles here.
Yes. No, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for just the work that you do and the advocacy, and just, you've been unknowingly a big mentor of mine, and I really respect you for that. So thank you.
Well, and thanks for doing your work with parents, because we need it, like a lot of it. Thank you, and we'll see everybody next week. Thanks for joining us today. And remember, it's your body, your choice, and finding your voice is your power. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us in all the places, and go to birtheducationcenter.com for our blog and more online education classes. And we'll see you next week.